Welcome to the Teaching Tax Flow podcast, where the goal is to empower and educate you to legally and ethically minimize taxes paid over your lifetime.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Teaching Tax Flow, the podcast. On to episode 27 today, Alternative Investments. Specifically, we're going to take a glimpse into the exotic wildlife industry. Yes, that's a thing. Now, if you're not familiar with this, I almost guarantee you're asking yourself, what in the world are you guys doing talking about exotic animals? And how in the world does that relate to taxes? Well, strap in, be ready for this one. But before we do that and introduce you to our fantastic guest as always, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor.
This podcast is brought to you by Legacy Lock. If you are new to estate planning or simply need to review your current plan, Legacy Lock makes it as easy as pie. Legacy Lock is a unique platform that enables you to easily complete your attorney-drafted documents conveniently from the comfort of your home or office. Your first step to this peace of mind is simply visiting teachingtaxflow.com/legacy.
Welcome back to the Teaching Tax Flow podcast. I am John Trapolsky from the TTF team here with Chris Gilroy. How are we, Chris?
I am amazing, and I'm extremely excited about today's podcast. And there's another Chris on the cast today. The subject matter is absolutely fascinating, and it's one of my favorite things to talk about when it comes to tax planning and strategy.
Well, Chris, you guys just like to make it difficult. Normally, like, John's a more common name. There's a lot of, the name John can be a lot of things, and we won't go into that topic on the podcast. But how about we talk about something different than taxes for a minute, right? Let's talk to probably the best individual that either of us have ever met or know in the industry. And of course, we do weird stuff here, or some people think, that may or may not be related. So we will let you figure out how that plays into effect. But let's talk about the exotic wildlife business. So if your ears, pun intended, ears are not perked, Chris, why don't you give the introduction to this gentleman here?
Absolutely. We are honored to be joined by Chris Gilroy of Wildlife Partners. Wildlife Partners, like you said, is an innovative wildlife conservation company. And we talk about that tax laws or tax agencies are your involuntary business partner all the time. That's one of our 3 laws of teaching tax flow. And if you didn't know that and you're listening, 1, welcome to the podcast. And 2, go back and start listening to episode 1 and catch up. But we're happy you're here. But we know that tax laws are written to encourage and discourage certain behavior. We talk a lot about real estate as being an industry that is very much tax advantaged. But today, and there are a couple other industries that are tax advantaged, but today, the wildlife, agriculture, that whole industry is very tax advantaged. And we're going to dive into some of those tax advantages, along with some other things today with Chris Gilroy. So Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. And it will be fun to tag team with John today, given the fact we have 2 Chris's. I only have one rule, and you cannot call me Chris Exotic.
Oh, former stage name?
Well, hey, let's, everybody knows we do cheesy things. Let's address the elephant in the room. Literally, should we? What in the world is exotic? What is the exotic wildlife business? Do you guys run a zoo? What in the world are you guys doing over there in San Antonio?
No, John, it's actually kind of funny. There is this awesome, amazing industry that started in 1930 in Texas. And it started to really get its new look in the 50s, and then it's just grown dynamically ever since then. And what it is it's wealthy landowners who have these amazing animals on their ranches. We're now up to about 125 species. I'm talking everything from rhinos down to the smallest little gazelle that you see on Nat Geo being chased by a cheetah. It is everything in between, and it was started, like I said, back in the 30s. It grew over time. And I think one of the most amazing things about it is people don't understand where the animals came from. They think that they were flown over on airplanes from Africa or Asia. And reality is they all came from zoos. It's something that's been chronicled in many different, news outlets over the last 15 years where there's been stories written about. But it's just this amazing industry where people are protecting wildlife, many of which, by the way, are extinct where they come from in Africa, but they're thriving here in Texas.
So you guys really are in the conservation business.
Absolutely. We've got 15 species that are on the endangered species list. Everything from absolutely gone, where they come from in Africa, to on the verge of extinction in Africa, and then some that are more stable, like our Kenyan mountain bongo. I'm sorry, the Grevy's zebra. The Grevy's zebra, there's about 3,000 globally. There's 2,000 in Africa. Thankfully, those are stable, but it's one of the species that we have here in Texas, and we have some on each one of our ranches.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to keep sucking the air out of the room. I don't know if I'm going to let the other Chris talk today because I'm so intrigued with this. So before we find a way to circle this back into the tax space, just very, very briefly, how in the world did you ever get into this?
It was a tax dodge. That's what it was. My brother and I were in a different industry, and it was fairly successful for us. And we had heard that if you purchased exotic wildlife for your ranch for the purpose of breeding, that you got to deduct, at the time, it was bonus depreciation was 50%. So it was simply a way to cut our tax bill. It was the animals were purchased as a means for reducing the tax bill. And then, of course, we figured out a couple of years later, we had to justify it as a business instead of a hobby. So we started selling some of the animals. And through that process, we discovered there was this amazing industry out there where there was just a very sophisticated industry because it was an industry of the wealthy. And so we spent a few months really digging into it and decided to start a business around it. So truly a hobby that became a business that started by trying to avoid taxes.
Dave, all right. Well, now I'll let the other Chris talk. Now that you talk about double team it, now that you completely stole my thunder because I'm trying to avoid him talking, then you reeled it back into taxes. So congratulations, Chris, as you get the mic back.
Well, I want to talk about the tax part of the of wildlife. But again, what I was surprised by is I've been working with wildlife partners for a few years in our private CPA practice is the conservation efforts. But again, we kind of think about that tax play, but there's also the conservation that you described, and that the industry has been around for almost 100 years at this point. So it's not something that just popped out in the last couple of years. I'm going to ask one more thing is, how did you pick San Antonio, and why does San Antonio work for this industry?
So we were already based there. I mean, that's home for us. So that's the clear, obvious thing. But the other aspect of it is the climate and terrain of the Texas Hill Country and surrounding areas. It mimics Africa. It's the same type of land, the same type of trees, the same type of grasses, the same weather for the most part. We get a little bit colder here than they do in Africa, but it mimics it, and it's just ideal. And it's why Texas is Noah's Ark for these species.
Well, everything's bigger in Texas, we know, and not all the animals are large animals. Now let's pivot on to the tax part of this. As you mentioned, with the tax cuts, and bonus depreciation isn't a new concept. What bonus depreciation is, for listeners that aren't familiar with it, is it's an additional deduction you get the first year that you buy an asset or place an asset into service. And a lot of times we think about assets as a vehicle or a piece of property, but when you are breeding animals or even farmers, if they're breeding cattle, the actual animal itself is considered a depreciable asset. Doesn't mean we don't love them and we don't take care of them, but from a tax perspective, they're a depreciating asset. So with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, we were in the glory days of 100% bonus depreciation. We're still in a great situation here with 80% bonus depreciation here in 2023. And what that means is that any amount invested in a depreciable asset, which is not any depreciable asset, but let's say non-real estate related, minus the cost segregation study, but that's another episode. John knows I can't go down that rabbit hole. You can deduct 80% of that asset immediately. So that makes someone that's investing in allowing wildlife partners to expand its efforts to pick up some tax deductions. So, Chris, can you talk just a little bit about what type of bonus depreciation someone might be able to enjoy typically with looking at the wildlife partners investment?
Sure. So right now, with bonus depreciation being at 80%, generally right now, someone's looking at a first-year deduction of about 82 or 83% because of the other expenses plus the depreciation of the animals.
And the nice thing is with something like this, a lot of times, let's say someone's self-employed and they do want to put some money in motion in a tax-advantaged way. When they're talking about retirement plan contributions like a SEP or or something like that, there are some significant limitations on how much you could put in those accounts. So this is an investment that really complements a lot of the other things that you're doing and diversifies your asset class also. So there's another part of this too that lends itself to other strategies. We also know, we know that different income is taxed, or income is taxed differently based on what type of income it is. And we know that capital gains, especially long-term capital gains, are taxed at, let's say, about 50% of the rate of normal income. Does the capital gains tax play a role with Wildlife Partners at all?
It actually does. So the cash flow that we generate from the funds that we manage, because we keep that offspring for at least a year and a day, the income that's generated from those sales is taxed at long-term cap gains.
Mm-hmm. And now that's very valuable when we're talking in the teaching tax flow system, tax-free income and growth. And a lot of times we see taxpayers that want to diversify their portfolio. They want to talk to the folks at Wildlife Partners. And let's say they're sitting on a long-term capital loss of a real situation. We looked at a tax return in our private practice just today, had a $200,000 long-term capital loss carry forward that they're only being able to deduct $3,000 per year. They were involved with some bad investments, had some bad advice. Well, for someone like that long-term capital gain from an investment like this would actually be tax-free until they expire that $200,000 of capital loss. So a lot of time it's called capital gain harvesting, but a lot of times, not only could this be a good investment, it could also have some big tax benefits. And I have another question as far as if we strip away the tax benefits, we're just going to touch on that one more time before we end. What are just can you walk us through a typical life cycle of a transaction with breeding the animals, offspring, and how they're, how are they monetized?
Sure. So the way our funds generally model out is when we start the fund, we're going to acquire the entire herd of animals. It's going to take a good year to get those all in place. Then, as we mentioned, we keep all of the offspring born for at least a year before we sell them. So you're not looking at any type of return other than that initial year tax savings until somewhere around the 18th to the 21st month of the fund being active. I can't remember if you said 3 or 4 pinnacles to what you were talking about with teaching tax flow. I look at any investment in today's world as having 3 things that I personally look for. One is, does it do something good for the world? So an impact investment. 2 is, does it actually have the ability to make money? And 3 is, can it also reduce my tax bill? And I like the fact that what we do touches all of those for each person we built with.
Absolutely. You nailed that. And a question we get in the teaching tax flow community and in our Defeating Taxes private Facebook group, defeatingtaxes.com. If you have a question, you want to jump in. So a lot of times people want to get involved, taxpayers want to get involved with an investment like this, but they might not have the liquid cash available. They're interested in investing within a retirement plan. Is that possible at all?
Yes, we're always set up with multiple different houses that have our facility have our product on their platform. So we've got several different custodians across America we've used over the last 5 years.
That's how we connected a few years ago as well. And again, one of the, we talk a lot about blending. We're talking about breeding today, so we're going to talk a little bit about blending tax strategies. And there are some we're not going to dive into the weeds too much, but there's some really good ways that you can blend an investment like this with strategies like a Roth conversion. So especially a lot of our listeners, our business owners, they might have a good amount of cash flow in a year, but they won't have a lot of taxable income, and they find it's a good year to accelerate income and maybe do a Roth conversion. And then you couple that with an investment like this, and we just had a great episode with a self-directed IRA expert, then you could really do some cool things. So again, we don't want to dive. Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I say Chris, and everybody raised their hand. Chris Gilroy, Chris. Before we get too far into it too, talk us maybe through a little bit, not to deviate or pull off of the tax side, but what are some myths that people may think of, that you maybe get these questions of, and it's either so far-fetched that it's almost hilarious, or ones that just may be a little bit different of what somebody's thinking. Just because even from a personal opinion or a personal perspective, Chris had mentioned, y'all to me probably a few years ago now, maybe. And I had that moment of what in the world is that? And then obviously after that kind of state of shock, if you will, comes a lot of questions. So maybe walk us through 3 or 4 or however many come to mind of just kind of myths we could debunk here.
Sure. So the biggest myth, without any question, is most people from not in Texas make the assumption that these animals are simply raised for someone to go hunt them. And that's not what we do. And there are several factors for that. Look, I enjoy hunting. A lot of our partners enjoy hunting. But we're not a big player in the commercial hunting industry. There's a myriad of factors. There's the fact we do a lot of business with zoos. The fact that some of those guys don't hunt ethically, so we don't work with them. But what it really comes down to is there's this very sophisticated industry of wealthy landowners that like having these animals on their ranches, and they don't ever plan to hunt them. They simply have them there for aesthetics, for conservation, for keeping up with the Joneses, bragging rights, fun factor. But the other side of that is we've taught them, to steal some pages out of Chris's bucket, we've taught them how to convert their ranch property, their vacation property, into a business. So now they're able to take tax deductions on their ranches. We're coming back and we're buying all of the offspring they produce in the second year. So now they're generating income. So they're literally justifying their vacation property as a business, and there are endless possibilities to that. So the hunting industry is not where we play. The animals that we produce from these funds are not sold directly to commercial hunting ranches. So that's the biggest myth that's out there. It's one of the first questions I get from anyone that's not around this world is, are they just being raised so somebody can hunt them? So fairly, what the next big myth might be. I think people generally assume these animals are running around in a zoo type environment. They're shocked to find out that between our 4 ranches, we have 11,000 acres, and an average pen, if you will, in air quotes for the audio of that portion of this, is about 500 acres. So that's a pen for us.
So you're definitely not throwing them into a doghouse.
No, these animals are running around in a very wild environment. We want them getting about 80% of their nutrition off the land, and then about 20% supplemented from us. That will teeter more towards us in the winter, or during lean rain years. But that's probably the biggest, I guess, myths that are out there. Most people, quite frankly, have just never heard of it. They're shocked to hear that there's this $1 billion industry in Texas selling animals, because they don't it's kind of like when you first heard about it, John, you're like, "Say what? Like, this is doing what, where?" It's actually been talked about recently on another podcast from a guy named Joe Rogan. You may know the name. He's talked about it twice in the last 3 months because he now lives in Texas and he's seen it, and it's flooring to most people. That'd probably be it for myths.
No, and thank you for diving into both of those two in detail, right? Because it's something that if you don't know what it is, again, you have more questions than answers. So to kind of reiterate a couple of things, one of which you said, early on, I mean, this is not something that you just kind of pull out of a hat and said, you know what, I'm going to start raising animals and, saving the wildlife world. It's been going on for 100 plus years, well, almost 100 years, since 1930s. So obviously the credibility is there. And then to also hear that, y'all are just raising these like sheep, nothing against sheep, but, they have a very specific purpose in life, or cattle, you know what I mean? Just, it's not I should say designed and executed in a commercial environment for consumption or enjoyment in that sense. So thank you for going to those two details too. We really appreciate
There's probably one more myth, now that you bring that up, there's probably one more myth out there that's just because the industry has been just on fire for the last 15 years or so. Everybody's making the assumption there has to be some bubble, if you will, coming. They compare it to the ostrich and the emu thing back in the 90s. I don't know if you recall that or not, where it was supposed to be the next food source, and they were really easy to raise and breed. And so everybody was buying up ostrich and emu, and you had individual pairs, like 2 ostrich selling for $100,000. We've seen similar prices. A great example is there was an auction this last weekend with a friend of ours. They had 1 Cape buffalo in that auction, and she sold for $790,000.
Well, holy cow. What, if you don't mind me asking, like what makes that buffalo worth that much versus, the one a couple miles up the road from me?
There's only a few hundred Cape buffalo in America. The animal you're talking about is a bison. It's an American bison, where there's thousands and thousands of those here in America. In America, we estimate there's no more than about 400 Cape buffalo. We happen to be the largest owner of Cape buffalo in America. We've got about probably 65 of them right now. But that price that got set was even beyond. We had just sold 3 the prior week for an average of 500,000 each, and we saw them set for 790. So we have a very happy customer right now. But people make the assumption that there's this bubble getting ready to burst, and what they don't understand is there's a very substantial gap between supply and demand right now in Texas. You've got a demand that is through the roof, that is increasing every single day because our industry is becoming more sophisticated, more intelligent, and they're becoming more successful with animals because of things that we and others are doing to make the industry a better place. Well, at the same time, the supply is tiny. And it's been that way forever, and there's really no way to change it because we can't import anything because of foot and mouth disease, or mad cow disease. So you can't bring anything here from Africa because every country in Africa has had a history of that disease. So we've got this crazy ever-growing demand and a supply that's very, very tight and really isn't having trouble growing. And so I don't feel like there's a bubble, but that's what everybody assumes, that there's going to be some bubble. But you can look to the history of South Africa to see a similar story. It took them 30 years of 20% compounding growth before they had what they called the bubble. And it was because they went from 100,000 animals to 28 million, which is a big number. Right now, we have less than 200,000 animals here. So we're like in 1994 when they started their industry in 1991, to put it in perspective.
Well, I'll shut up with my questions because I feel like I can talk for hours on this. I'm so intrigued. And I know, Chris, we're headed out your way a little bit later, I think in next quarter here, a couple months to come, play with some animals. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to try to ride a zebra. I promise.
Although to see that, and I'd feel bad for the zebra.
Although Chris,
unless you lasso a Cape buffalo.
I don't think me lassoing a $750,000 animal now is probably a good idea. Although, Chris, the other Chris, he runs like a gazelle. So, we could just let him loose in the field and I'll run it down.
Oh, no, I don't think I'm gazelle-like anymore. And if John, I think if you imagine riding a $790,000 riding in something or on something $790,000, you're probably thinking of exotic parts. I know you're a car guy. I just want to
those are a little more predictable, I think. It's easier to anyways, I digress.
I just want to attest that, we had one of my friends who's a client of our private CPA firm go out to do his own due diligence at the Wildlife Partners and took his buddy and went to one of the auctions, and they had a great time and just had glowing things to say about the operation and how professional things are. And and I could say from experience on the tax side, this is for the right person, this could really make sense. One of the challenges is, and that's what I'm going to mention now, is that like Chris Gilroy said, there's not a supply is tough to develop. So there's not an unlimited amount of supply, meaning they don't take in an unlimited amount of money. It's not like a mutual fund that you could just dump as much money as you want into. And I will say that these investment opportunities it's not a matter of if, it's when they cap out. And every year I've been working with this, it caps out sooner and sooner in the year. And so the fact that there's a lot of times there are investors at the end of the year that are trying to take advantage of the strategy, and there's no more inventory of left to invest in. So if you want to learn more about this, please let us know here at Teaching Tax Flow, or check out the Wildlife Partners wildlifepartners.com website. We'll have that in the show notes, and they have a really cool Facebook. They have an Instagram page, really cool Facebook page that updates statistics and inventory and things from the auctions that I like to follow myself. So
excellent. Well, Chris Gilroy, is there anything else maybe that you might want to toss in here? I know we kind of dove off on a couple angles, and again, we look forward to chatting with you for a long time when we're out there. But I think we.
I tell you, one thing that's been amazing about this is there's a lot of things you can do in the world, and it's with your investments and your tax savings strategies and everything else. I think the best thing for me, not the best thing, but something that surprised me is how much people want to be involved in this. When we have an auction, like we have an auction coming up May 5th and 6th, there will be 350 to 400 people there. So of that group, there's going to be over 100 of those that are partners in what we do. And Chris mentioned his partner, one of his longtime clients came down, brought a buddy, and they were just floored. He got to meet all these people from all different walks of life from all across America that shared this common bond of being involved in this crazy wildlife partners thing. And it was just a lot of fun. And people tend to come visit, once a year besides the auctions. And it's just fun watching people get involved with stuff, because it's hard to get involved in a real estate deal. It's hard to get involved in other stuff like that. So but this is something that people can actually be involved in, and who wouldn't want to see a bongo or a Grevy zebra or maybe not a Cape Buffalo. They're kind of an angry cow, but
they're expensive too.
They're expensive, angry cows. That is correct. But so it's just
like a perfect storm.
I feel very, very blessed and fortunate to be a part of this industry. And we've met so many awesome people over the years, and it's fun when those people develop, trying to think of the right word, an appreciation and admiration for exactly what's going on here in Texas. And not just with us, it's with everybody. You can't have an industry of our size with just one company. And there's a lot of people out there doing a lot of good for these animals.
Well, I thank you so much for coming on. Please let us know. Jump in that Defeating Taxes private Facebook group, or just message us here, hello@teachingtaxflow.com or wildlifepartners.com. There, you have a cool website with a lot of neat information.
Excellent. Well, thank you both, Chris's. We'll call it Chris Squared, for jumping into this, both sides of the fence. And again, Chris Gilroy, we'll be seeing you. I haven't had the opportunity to meet you in person yet, so I really look forward to that. And yeah, we'll find a good place so we can let the other Chris run out in the field somewhere, and maybe release something behind him and chase him around a little bit. But I would pay for that. I would definitely sell tickets to that, and that would be some good YouTube content, right?
Oh yeah, of course.
Case of CPA. There we go. We'll place bets. But all kidding aside, thank you, gentlemen, so much. And Chris, thank you for going into detail too on those myths and really just everything that you guys are doing out there. As expected, it's even better than I thought it was. So I really appreciate your insight.
Awesome, guys. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thank you, everybody, for joining us again on our podcast here. We have some great guests coming up here in the next week. Actually, a couple weeks after this, we've got some good ones and some good topics too. So be on the lookout for those. And again, as Chris Picuro mentioned, any questions that you guys may have, please jump into that Defeating Taxes Facebook group, send us a message, reach directly out to Wildlife Partners. I know we would love to help out and answer any questions that we can, but obviously they would be a great resource on their own as well. So thank you so much, and we will see everybody next week. Hey everybody, John Trapolsky here as always from Teaching Tax Flow, the podcast. Again, just wanted to wrap this up. Thank you as always for taking the time, hanging out with us for about 25 minutes or so. Chris Picuro, always an awesome co-host with myself. Chris Gilroy from the Wildlife Partners, fantastic guest. Learned a lot this one. And to be honest, it was one that I had no idea what it even was until maybe about a year ago or so, when me and Chris Picuro were chatting about some alternative investments and really just the opportunities that those present as part of a really, really robust tax strategy. So as we mentioned, jump into our Defeating Taxes private Facebook page, or group I should say, with any questions you have. But on this one, maybe a little different. If you're not comfortable asking those questions on there, maybe related to these alternative investments or Wildlife Partners specifically, again, reach out to them, Chris and the team, or send us an email at hello@teachingtaxflow.com. We're happy to make some connections. We're happy to answer some questions for you one-on-one, whether that's from Chris on our team, Nate on our team, or myself. We're happy to help you out. But a little bit different on this one as well. I think the big ask that I have for everybody now is wherever you listen to this podcast, give us a rating. Leave some comments, share with your friends, your colleagues, your family. Really just get it out there. We're seeing our downloads skyrocket on this show, which obviously we love seeing. We love that people are interacting with this and really consuming these podcasts, sending us their questions, sending us their comments. We love doing these. So be sure to give us them ratings, bump us up there in the listings a little bit, help us out, and we'll keep trucking along. So thank you as always.
The content of this podcast does not constitute an offer of securities. Offerings can only be made through an offering memorandum, and you should carefully examine the risk factors and other information contained in the memorandum. The content provided is for educational purposes only. We encourage you to seek personalized investment advice from your financial professional. For all tax and legal advice, please consult your CPA or attorney. Investment advisory services are offered through Cabin Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cabin Securities, a registered broker-dealer.